What does neurodiversity even mean?
If you imagine any given human trait, let's say musical memory, you end up with a normal curve like this. Any sort of human trait you can think of makes a distribution like this. And all this means is that you have a lot of people in the middle and not a lot of people over here on the tails. And people often talk about standard deviations. So you've got, this would be one standard deviation below the mean, one standard deviation above the mean, two below, two above. And it just means how far you are from the mean, basically. And if you are more than 2 standard deviations above or below the mean, you are neurodiverse on this particular trait. You are in the minority. And so on that trait, like if you, like me, are really high, you're gonna go through life being like, why is it so hard for everyone else to play piano by ear? And if you're down here, you'll be like, how in the world does anyone play piano by ear? So basically, so if you can imagine, there's a lot of these, right? Like we have so many, you can imagine there's probably thousands of different measurable sort of cognitive activities that you could imagine measuring. You might say, well, doesn't everyone have the same number of strengths and weaknesses? But actually, it turns out that is a distribution too. That is also a normal curve. So in terms of like all human cognition, this is not like how good you are at all human cognition. This is how unusual you are. So how far off the mean, above or below you were on any of the previous traits. And so what you end up with is that it turns out that there's some people who just end up in the tails a lot, right? And that's what I would call neurodiverse. And so as a result, it encompasses a lot of contradictory abilities. Like some people who are neurodiverse have amazing semantic memories, and some of us can't remember anything. Some people are like hyperlexical, like we're great readers, really fast readers, and other people are dyslexic. So we're all though neurodiverse. And you might be wondering, how do diagnoses come into this? Well, you can imagine like particular traits might cluster, and researchers might sort of draw a boundary around those traits and say, let's name this cluster dyslexia, let's name this cluster ADHD. But the problem is that these clusters are not holding up to empirical analysis. So there's a problem in psychology where you might start with like, I want to study autistic people's ability to read emotions, right? So you get a group of people who are autistic, who meet your criteria for autism, whatever they are, and you test this, and then you publish a result that says autistic people are less good at interpreting emotions than average, for instance. But the problem with this is that you've reinforced the category, like you've learned something about the category, but you also are making everyone else believe in this imaginary category that you made up. So all of our diagnoses right now are truly social constructs. And if you get one sort of neurodiversity diagnosis, you're really likely to qualify for another one. So basically, we've got a situation where we really need to take a step back and just do the biggest group we can imagine and just call us all neurodiverse. So this is my argument for big tent neurodiversity. And if you feel like you get a sense of identity or understanding from your named cluster, like autistic or ADHD, like go for it. That's great. Like social constructs do exist in their own way, right? If we believe in them, they exist. They're like Tinkerbell. But in terms of like physiological reality, this is what scientists are finding, is that people with more neurotypical brains have what is known as a, hub and spoke network. Hub and spoke network is like this, where you have highly connected central areas and then more sparsely connected outer areas. This is how more neurotypical brains are structured, and it's highly efficient. And that's why you end up towards the middle of most abilities, because you are making the most average choices. You're trying to really balance out all of the pros and cons on either side of the ability thing, and you're just going for the maximum you can do without messing up other abilities, right? So your brain is a hub and spoke. Whereas those of us who are neurodivergent, okay, so daisy chain network, this neuron is only connected to 2 other neurons. This neuron is only connected to these 2 neurons. And so you end up with a situation where you're going to have very efficient links, right? These are very efficient. These are very efficient. But if you want to go from here to there, you have to make 3 connections. This is basically the thing that makes neurodivergent people neurodivergent is that we're going to be very good at some things and we're going to be terrible at other things. And this reminds me of sort of the classic thing. If you end up in your school guidance counselor, and probably a lot of you guys listening to this did, because they were like, this person is not reading at her level, right? So it's like, we know this person's very smart and we don't understand why she can't read. So like they're pulling out the thing that's getting you in trouble. But here's the deal. If you have a neurodiversity that doesn't get you in trouble in school, or you are able to sort of work around and you just sort of figure out what to do in order to sort of fit in, then you will not get any sort of diagnosis. And that's kind of where I ended up. I was really, I was quite disabled. I was constantly lost in my middle school. I remember, I would forget my schedule, even though it was the same set of classes every day. I'd forget where I was, not be able to get from one place to another. They assigned lockers, and there was literally no chance that I was going to be able to find my locker in that corner of the building. It was a 3-story building, or that I would remember the combination, or basically there was no chance I could do that also in like the 5 minutes of passing time. So I literally carried all of my books on my back and my violin to every single class. So I was struggling, right? I was struggling academically. I was struggling socially. I had exactly one friend, hi Tracy, and and I was having a hard time. But then, my dad says that I just figured it out. In that same year, I got put into violin class, and somehow just sort of locating the one thing that I was good at helped me have the self-confidence and the belief in myself that I could figure the other stuff out. This is not a good logical reasoning, but I think at some level my brain was like, okay, you kill it at violin. Let's see if you can kill it at these other things too. And of course I never kill it at organization or whatever, but I have a lot of systems now that I can use to keep myself being functional in a neurotypical world. And then that brings me to my last point, where even though neurodivergent people encompass this huge variety of people, we do have some things in common. So neurodivergent people, what we all have in common is that we live in a world that was not built for us. So what does that mean we also might have in common? I think a lot of us are very crafty, inventive. We're always looking for workarounds because we always have to. So we're gonna just naturally figure out ways to sort of get around problems, because that's just how every time I encounter a problem, I expect that I am gonna have to invent my way of doing it, because listening to someone explain it to me, it is probably not gonna work. And so this is also why I don't bother reading directions, I don't bother listening to directions, and I know this is a self-reinforcing cycle, but I just expect that they're not gonna help me. And then I just rely on my own sort of trial and error to figure things out on my own. Of course, now that I'm 40 something, I'm trying to make myself read the directions and try to comprehend them at least. And actually I'm finding that most of the time it really is better for me just to try to figure it out. Yeah, so we're crafty, we problem solve, we may not listen to directions a lot. I think that we invent things sometimes and then we are shocked when they don't take off. And the reason why these inventions don't take off is because other people do not need them, right? Invention that is maybe weird, and I'm really curious if anyone else has it, but I am not a procrastinator. I'm not a procrastinator. I am a precrastinator. And that is because I know in my heart that if I don't do something now, it is never going to get done because I cannot remember. And maybe this is just a me problem, but the thing is, I assumed that my abilities in inner life were the norm. And this is very typical. I think neurotypical people assume that too, but they are closer to right. So if you're neurodivergent like me, you are probably making some really incorrect assumptions about everyone in your life, or almost everyone. So I have no inner monologue. I have no ability to visualize. So my inner life is very quiet. If you could, if you were a mind reader, you would get snow, in old timey TVs. And it's really, I'm sure there's a lot of thinking going on, but it's below my level of conscious awareness generally. So I assumed that was true for everyone, and I didn't understand why other people have so much trouble meditating. I didn't understand the concept of monkey mind. And most importantly, I didn't understand when other people did seem to be ruminating on something, I was just stop, because I would have to try to do that. I would have to be writing things down, but for other people, it is effortless and in fact, their normal state of being. And so try to think about the ways in which you are unusual and then think about how you might have unintentionally applied it to other people in your life. The big mistake everyone makes is assuming that their inner life is a lot like other people's. And so if you quiz someone, even if you're the most average person in the world, if you quiz someone on this, you might find ways that are just radically different. And like me, you might have trouble believing in them or not believing, it's hard to believe in something you can't imagine. But again, so here's what's convinced me, honestly, is the brain imaging. So people who can visualize, their brains actually light up, in their visual areas when they try to imagine that kind of thing. Also, people who can visualize, this is just neurotypical, not hypervisualizers. Their irises constrict in response to imagined light. And they also get sweaty when they read stressful passages. And people who cannot visualize do not get stressed out by reading because we're not imagining anything. And I guess visual imagery is more tied to your emotions than reading is like one step abstracted or one step removed from reality. So this brings me to my main point, which is, Sadie, isn't everyone neurodivergent? And the answer, like I kind of mentioned before, was that the answer is no. Like most people are within one standard deviation of the mean. And so in this distribution of standard distributions, some of us are going to tend to be in the tails. Some of us are going to tend to be really good at things and really bad at other things and not in the middle of most things, whereas most people are in the middle of most things. So neurodivergent friends, you are special too. There's lots of other interesting, like what you do in life, but in terms of the way your brain works, if you're neurotypical, you're median, you are normative, you're normative. So that's okay. We're out on the tails, and that is what neurodivergence means.